What if your greatest success came at the cost of your peace, your marriage, and nearly even your sense of self? Our guest today lived that story. Welcome to the Learn It All podcast, the show for today's leaders who want to get ahead and stay ahead because we believe great leaders aren't born or made, they are always in the making. I'm your host, Damon Lemby, two-time best-selling author and CEO of Learn It, a live learning platform that has helped upskill over 2 million people over the past 3 decades. In a moment, I'll be joined by Butch Meily, a former PR strategist who helped shape the narrative behind one of the largest leverage buyouts in the history of the United States.
You've got to keep going no matter what, and that's got to sustain you. Someday, we're each going to get a break, and the idea is to be ready when that break comes to take advantage of it.
I'm super excited to dive into Butch's book because I'm going to be asking him to share why chasing someone else's version of success can quietly unravel your life, what it really looks like to work with powerful people, and the emotional toll it can take. The raw leadership lessons Butch learned from billionaire Reginald Lewis about his identity, pressure, and ambition, and how to recognize when your ambition is driving you towards burnout. Butch, in the prologue of your book, you said you made a living attaching yourself to powerful people. Why did you open with that line? And what did attaching yourself to powerful people end up costing you?
Well, I opened on that line because it was sort of a Gatsby type opening, because I was introducing myself, and the Gatsby of my tale is Reginald Lewis, who's a larger than life character. But in terms of what did it cost me? I mean, in the end, cost me my marriage. Because the whole idea of working with powerful people, I worked with a whole series of them, is that they want, very often, most of them, they want all your time, and there's a price to be paid. And in terms of my personal life, that price was my relationship with my ex-wife.
So you have a brand new book out that I read that I thought was great, From Manila to Wall Street. And it's kind of a memoir about your life story, and also, like you mentioned, Reginald Lewis. Why now? Why did you decide to write that book now?
My wife and I broke up a few years ago, and it's almost like God gave me a trade. He said, you can finally write that book you've been wanting to write, but it's going to cost you something. And it cost me the relationship, because then I had the time, I had the motivation to write it. I wrote it in one stretch in 2019. It took me all these years to get it out. But I'm glad I did it. It's something I'd always wanted to do from many years ago, about this unforgettable character. Well, I was going to do it fiction. I'd said do it nonfiction. But it was a trade. I suddenly had the time to do it.
Before I get into some of the wild stories, which I really appreciate and love, let's talk about, for our audience, give us a little background on the structure of the book, how it's written, and then also who really is this book for? Like, who should go out and buy this book, and what would they all learn from it?
Well, the structure of the book, and it went through 7 editors, but the structure of the book, it goes back and forth a little bit from what was the present time, the 80s and the 90s, the go-go years, companies getting taken over overnight by people you'd never heard of, back to my life when I first came to the States, and tracks me there. It goes back and forth to the actual takeover, the $1 billion bid for Beatrice International, how that happens, then segues back again. This is a popular thing, I guess, on Netflix, Amazon, and they go back and forth. I mean, it's not enough to stick with one story all through, but you got to keep them engaged, so it bounces back and forth. And in between, there's a love story. 2 love stories, really. It's about 4 people in the 80s and 90s in New York City, mostly, and Paris.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about, I believe it's the first story in the book, Call Me Reg. So the first time you got that phone call, I believe, from his wife.
Yes, I was sitting in, as I call it, my windowless office on Park Avenue and 19th Street at Burson Marsteller. And I was pretending to work hard. I got this phone call from a lady who I didn't know, and she had an accent, and she told me she got my name from a Wall Street Journal reporter, and not to worry, because her husband had a PR problem, but someday he'd be a big client for us. So I agreed to meet with him on the phone. I had to go through several layers of executives to talk to him. I finally did, and it turned out he had a PR problem. I wound up meeting him in the lobby of the New York Times, and that's the only time I realized he was African American. It was just before the interview I set up for him with the New York Times reporter, which at the time, New York Times was like one of the big opinion leaders. If you could snare a story in the business pages, it kind of set the tone for everybody else. And I was able to do it. And his name was Reginald Lewis. At the time, he was on the brink of becoming one of the top players on Wall Street. And I managed to catch him at just the right moment. And he went on to do $1 billion bid for Beatrice International, which had a lot of name brands, Tropicana, Samsonite, Orville Redenbacher. But that was the big break for me.
And his PR problem was the deal he did with Macau, I believe, right? And he was pissed because they didn't give him any credit for it.
Yeah, McCall Pattern Company, a British group bought it,
yeah.
and they sort of kicked him under the rug. And so did the managers, who he'd rewarded with multi-million-dollar stock, and he felt slighted. So he called the New York Times reporter who wrote the story, and in those days you could get everybody's name out of the phone book, no matter who you were. And he woke him up at 6 a.m. to yell at him, and so that was a problem because I happened to know the guy. He was a really nice guy, the guy named Dan Cuff. And so I called him after I had my conversation with Reg Lewis and told him, would you meet with him? And why should I meet with this guy? Why is he calling me at 6 a.m. about a story I wrote? But I managed to patch things up, and we finally did meet. And the big thing is I got a second story out of it with a photo, which is very rare in the paper like the New York Times. And that really started the whole thing off. It raised me a whole different level in terms of my career, and brought Reg the recognition that helped land him the big deal, helped bring him to the attention of a guy named Mike Milken, who was leading all these billion-dollar takeovers at the time.
One of the things I thought was interesting and fascinating in your book was that you leave, you get that great story, you get a picture of Reg in there, but then I believe in the ride in the car, didn't he just turn on you right there and to get all pissed?
Yeah, I was really, Damon, I was on a high. I thought I'd scored a home run. I bagged the New York Times interview for him, and we walked out of the Times, and I just met Reg. And he asked me to ride with him in the car, and I expected to get congratulated or at least get a thank you from him. And I got neither. I never heard one thank you. And all through the car ride back, it was in this chauffeur-driven Bentley. All he did was yell at me. And, I just met this guy. He hadn't even
what were you thinking when he was yelling at you?
I said that I wanted to get out of the car, which I wound up doing eventually. But I said, I was just amazed at this individual. I was looking at him, and I know very few people in this world who you do them big favor. You get them an interview in the New York Times, and all they do is yell at you because it wasn't good enough. It was never good enough, and that's what I came to learn about Reg Lewis, was that he was a very demanding guy, and if you hit a single or double, it wasn't enough. You should have had a triple or a home run. And no matter what your profession was, whether you're in accounting, finance, PR, he raised the level of your game, which is important.
Do you think that made you better? Do you think that that leadership style, worked maybe, let's say in the 80s, would work now as well?
Well, it made me better in terms of my profession. It made me different as a person, but it turned me into a nervous wreck. And I'm Damon, I'm still recovering from it 30, 40 years late. Because if you get yelled at every day of your life and being told you're so-and-so and what, you get blamed for all kinds of things. I know a lot of people who didn't make it and never did quite recover.
Why'd you stay?
Well, the money was big. I mean, I was jumped to a whole different level financially. I was getting Wall Street type salaries with you get bonuses. You get shares, and it's a great life, except for the fact that when you come home at the end of the day, it's real late at night, and you don't feel like a very good person. And Sunday nights you're sitting with a knot in your stomach, wondering about Monday morning, and going back to work and wondering what you're going to get yelled at. And many of the people I worked with did not make it. I mean, our marriages broke up, and I think their confidence took a hit, and so did mine.
And what you told me before we came on air was that one of the main reasons why you wrote this book is to learn from your life, help others learn from some of your stories. So is that one of them right there, that you're hoping that your readers will say, hey, look, Butch took all this abuse, he learned from it, and if you had to do it all over again, would you do it differently?
Yeah, I keep going back to what Barbara Bush said at when she gave the commencement address at Wellesley College one time, that at the end of your life, you're not going to think about, boy, I should have gone to the office more often, or I should have done more deals. What you are going to regret is not spending more time with your family, with your kids, and that's really true. And I regret not starting having a family earlier in life because of the pressure of work. I regret not spending more time with my wife and my kid when we had them because of the pressure of work. So I do regret those things. And at the end of the book, I say, ordinary people living ordinary lives who get to go home at the end of the day, kick back, have a beer, and watch a ball game are much happier than the big names and the VIPs that you hear about on social media or in the media here, in the papers or on radio or in podcasts. I mean, they're happier in the end because they get time to with their families. They get to go home at a certain time. They don't get called in the middle of the night and yelled at or asked to come in on Saturday morning or meet on a Sunday. So that's what I realized after all that.
But do you think it's possible to have both, to have the success and the fame and also have the happiness? Or do you think that it's a devil's trade? You got to either go for, if you want to go that route, you have to go all in and sacrifice the happiness.
Well, I think you have it all about Damon, right? I mean, yeah, you're successful. You look pretty happy to me. But I think it's possible to be successful and happy, and the key is to have a loving spouse, and to be able to take the time to have a lot of time to be with the family, and to not be in a job where it takes your Saturdays and your Sundays. Because I've worked with CEOs. It wasn't just Reg. I mean, I'm working with a CEO now in Asia, and in Asia they regard your personal time very differently than over here, and people get very surprised over there when they get called into meetings on Sundays. Or when they're asked to stay till 2 in the morning for meetings, and that's not a happy life. And some of the CEOs I've worked with are not happy people.
I think it's good advice. I think that you got to learn to set boundaries if possible, or it depends on the where you are in your life. If you're young and you're not looking at having a family, go all in. Commit, put the effort and time in. I'm a big believer, Butch, and I'm just like you in the sense is that there's no substitute for hard work. Now, I'm not saying sacrifice your family, and for somebody who's got 2 young kids, I got to make sure I'm present for them. I don't want to miss that. But I love working. I don't love getting yelled at, from bosses or baseball coaches back in the day, but I love learning from guys like you and the stories that you have. And speaking of stories, you've mentioned it twice, the big Beatrice, the LBO deal. Now, for our listeners who aren't familiar with what a leverage buyout is, can you give just a 101, just a quick version of what that is, and then go right into the story about Reg and Beatrice?
Sure. I mean, leverage buyout is a case where somebody goes out, borrows a lot of money, and he or she takes that money and to buy a huge corporation, because all you needed at the time was a letter from Michael Milken saying that was highly confident he could get the deal done, a firm called Drexel Burnham Lambert. You show up with that letter, and some of the largest companies in the world got taken over. RJR Nabisco, Beatrice Foods, TWA, you name it. These were household names, and that's why corporate executives at the time were terrified. I mean, they were terrified of somebody coming in and with a lot of borrowed money and just taking over, buying up shares from their shareholders, offering them a higher price, taking over the company. And what typically happened after you took the company over was you broke it up. You took the pieces, sold it for higher prices, and then you used that money to pay down the money that you'd originally borrowed. And you'd wind up with the core operations with virtually very little debt. And it was an amazing thing. And using other people's money. And there's a play about that once in a couple of movies, I think. A month after the McCall pattern story came out in the New York Times, Reg called me over one night to his apartment and said, I've got another deal for you. And, the press was going to be important. And then he started to tell me this fantastic story about this company called Beatrice International that had 64 companies in 31 countries around the world, and a company called KKR, which is one of the big LBO firms at the time, and it's still around today. They were going to have an auction, and it was a big international auction. He was planning to bid for it. And first I thought, this guy's dreaming. I read one story in the New York Times, the business section, but it's not going to buy you a multi-billion-dollar company. But then he went about and said about going with that bid. He met with Michael Milken and Drexel. He got their backing, and I talk about that a little bit in the story. And then it all boiled down to one evening, in which they were all huddled around one of those old telephone sets, these black handphone sets, and it was on speaker mode. And it was an auction that was conducted on the phone. And it was all comers. Citicorp, as it was known then, it's now called Citibank, bid for it. Big French company called Bongrand, which is a multinational back then food company, they bid for it. And then they had this one small group that Reg Lewis controlled called the TLC Group that nobody had ever heard of. And they wound up putting in the highest bid for $985 million. And the investment bankers from Salmon Brothers said, there's a problem. Nobody knows who the hell you are. And they said, they finally had to produce that letter from Milken. And but it was almost $1 billion bid. It took a lot of guts by somebody, because if you bid too high, you're going to go bankrupt. If you bid too low, you're going to lose the bid, and you wind up with all these expenses, investment bankers and accountants and lawyers that you'd have to pay off. So people's jobs were on the line when Reg bid that, but he made it happen. And then he had pre-sold a lot of the assets to Spanish companies and Canadian companies and British companies and Asian companies. So he wound up with a core of European assets. So he wound up spending a lot of time in Paris because of that, which is great, despite the ailing. And I always regard Paris with great feelings to this day.
So where did the courage have to come in from? Is it from Milken's position backing a guy like Reg, or was it really Reg having to go out on a limb and gamble and find that sweet spot? Not too high and not too low.
Well, the courage comes from within you. I mean, it's got to come from there. It's not from somebody else. And the drive was inside this man, Reginald Lewis. He had this enormous drive. He came from nowhere. He came from a semi-tough neighborhood in Baltimore. He kicked the door in and made it into Harvard Law School on a scholarship. And he started the first all-black law firm after he was told he would never make partner at one of the Wall Street type firms called Paul Weiss. And he just kicked the door in several times, and he broke through. And I think in the end he paid the price for it, because there's an enormous amount of stress. And he wound up dying at the age of 50 years old. but he broke through a lot of barriers.
For our listeners out there who are maybe starting their own thing or going through a career transition, what could they learn from Reg when it comes to not giving up? I know he had a lot of stress and maybe there was not some great things about him, but what can they learn from that to help push their career forward?
Well, one of the lessons that he kept pushing and talking about, especially towards the end, was the idea, keep going no matter what. And he would keep repeating this in his speeches, and it became his mantra in the end. And I think that's important for people because we're all going to get knocked down several times. I mean, we talked about this a little bit before the podcast, but everybody's going to get kicked around, and it's like Popeye. I'm not sure how many people remember who Popeye is, but I mean, you have to keep getting back up and going for it. And I try to tell my son this, that when you can get fired from a job, you can get turned down, you may wind up without a date, but you've got to keep going no matter what, and that's got to sustain you, along with a certain faith, faith in yourself, faith in somebody up there, and if you have that, you're going to get a break. Someday we're each going to get a break, and the idea is to be ready when that break comes to take advantage of it.
Absolutely. And timing too. I think I'm not a believer in luck. I think you are a believer in luck. And what I mean by that is I think, Butch, me, I feel like you create your own luck. You get knocked down, you get back up, you try again. It may not happen this time, may not happen next time, but eventually it will happen. And like you said, when you get that opportunity, you grab a hold of it. I grew up with a guy, Billy Mueller, played in the big leagues for several years. I actually lived in my apartment building. He was like a 32nd round draft choice for the St. Louis Cardinals. So he wasn't a high draft choice. And when he got called up to the big leagues at the Giants, that was his opportunity. And he took it, he went with it, never looked back, won a batting title with the Red Sox and everything, So, but what's your take on that? Because I think in your book you talk about that luck has a lot to do with things.
Well, Reg believed in luck. I mean, he believed in the number 9. I mean, all our offices had the number 9 on it.
That's right.
99 Wall Street, 9 West 57th Street in New York, 99 Rue de la Paix in Paris. So he believed in luck. And I think at some point he felt luck deserted him toward the end. But it's really hard work. I mean, you're right about that. As Arnold Palmer, I think, said, the harder I work, the luckier I get. So you do make your own luck, and if you're not prepared to work hard, it's not going to happen for you. I mean, it's just not. If you don't go to school, if you don't study, or you don't learn a trade, but America's a great country. It's got the opportunities, but you've got to work for it.
Yeah, let's stay with that for a second. So you came from the Philippines, and you come to America, and I've heard you talk about it, like the land of opportunity, and you still believe that, right?
Oh, I do. I think America's the greatest country in the world. I still believe it. I first came over in 1977, and I talk about this in the book. It was like a breath of fresh air. I mean, I've been raised in a strict Catholic background. Nothing wrong with that, but it was like getting out of not exactly prison, but it was like getting out and getting this enormous freedom, and it was just terrific. The people were terrific; they still are, and there's no other country in the world, I can tell you that can give you as much opportunity if you're ready to work hard and take it. Because I think in other countries around the world, there's a caste system, there's a class system, and that's just not as true over here. I mean, if you have the credentials and you're prepared to work hard, you're going to be able to make it. And that goes for whether you're in some small rural town starting a restaurant, or whether you're in the big city. But if you're prepared to put in the time and the work, you're going to make it.
I'm with you, and I appreciate you saying that, because I feel like, look, we have our ups and downs here in America, and we're not perfect. And it just frustrates me when I hear people here, saying so many negative things because I think we're so grateful and we're so lucky to be here, and I'm blessed to have been born here. But there is a story in your book from Reg where he told you, you got a candy cane vision of America.
People here don't have no idea how lucky they are to be an American. But yeah, I mean, I'd watched a lot of Jimmy Stewart and Gregory Peck movies and all kinds of movies, and I loved the States from afar. And you read Lifetime, Newsweek, all that stuff, Reader's Digest, and I believed in America, and I fell in love with it when I came here. But when I met Reg, he said, "Boy, you've got this vision here. That's not the America that exists." And I guess what he taught me, Damon, is what it was like to be a little bit what it is to be an African American in the United States. And because I started working with him, I got to experience that firsthand. Whether it was getting a cab on Fifth Avenue or trying to get him an apartment on Fifth Avenue. I didn't realize at the time no blacks lived on Fifth Avenue because the New York Code boards, they turned you down. They only had a certain portion of apartments for Jews. And if you're black, you said, forget it. Real estate agents were pretty clear about it, but he wanted to be the first African-American to live on Fifth Avenue. And we managed to get him there. It was a great building too. But he died a month after he moved in. But I just didn't understand a lot of this when I came over. And I went to school at the University of Florida. I saw some of that, but it was not a big deal for me. But it was for I guess being black. It was different for him and for others.
And I would say that from reading your book, that was where some of his drive came
Yeah.
from, right?
Yeah, pushing.
And he wanted it to be, especially the first story was, this isn't a black success. This is an American success.
That was he driving that into me on that car ride from the Times. That's one of the things he was yelling about, was that he didn't want this to be a black success story. He didn't want to be pigeonholed. He felt that this was an American success story, and that's what he wanted to be judged on, not some ethnic thing. But he felt that his success was enough to be based on what everybody else was being based on. So that was important to him. It was important all the way through the Beatrice deal and so on. But it put a lot of pressure on him, to be honest. I think he felt like every time, and he mentioned this to me, every time he went out, it was like he was batting not just for himself, but for all black people.
I have no idea how he passed away or anything, but I think that pressure probably caught up to him. I saw it with my own dad, died of cancer, and I think a lot of it had esophagus cancer, and I think a lot of it had to do with the stress and pressure, which I think is another good thing for our listeners. And I know I learned from that. As successful as my dad was, he'd passed away at 62 years old, and there was a lot of stress and pressure around it. So Reg and my dad, we lose some great people that way. Look, now, Butch, I don't want to give away your whole book. Do you have a great story from your book we haven't talked about yet that you want to share?
Well, there's a bunch of stories in there which I think are pretty good, but I mean,
they are really good. Really good.
Paris, or you can talk about the fact that Reg had this huge mansion in the Hamptons, which is the big social scene in New York, and it wound up burning down in the middle of the night.
That's the story. Tell that one.
We were sitting in an office in Paris, and he got a phone call in the middle of the morning over there, and saying it was from his butler, saying that the house had burned down at night, and he said he started yelling at everybody. He said, "Let's get out of here. Let's get the corporate jet ready, and then we're flying to New York, to Long Island." I said, "Reg, yeah, that's great. Let me get my clothes at the hotel, and I'll meet you at the airport." He said, "Forget about it. We're leaving right now from this office. Leave everything you've got, toothbrushes, toiletries, clothes. You'll buy whatever you need when we get to the Hamptons." I said, "Really?" Okay. And he had the secretary call the hotels, and we all wound up on that flight. And all through the flight, though, Damon, he sat by himself in the front cabin, and he was muttering to himself, and he was working on this long legal pad, yellow legal pad that he always had. And finally, he called me up to the front, and he gave me a look at the page that he'd been working on, and on it was a long list of names. And then he told me that, who do you think did it? It turned out to be a list of suspects, and it included everybody he'd ever met or been friends with or worked with, and included some of the guys on the back of the plane with us. If we were on board with an arsonist, we're in trouble. But the only name it didn't include was mine, and I was grateful for that. I was really happy about it. But it just didn't look like any of these guys would have done it. But he'd been working on that list for hours, and he kept asking me, and he started asking me specifically, did so and so did it? Who you think? I mean, and so that was the atmosphere we were in. So we landed in the Hamptons, and then this great big house, which he took a lot of pride in, and relaxed in. And Mayor Dinkins had been there from New York. Arthur Ashe, the famous black tennis player, had been in, and all kinds of stars. And I was gone, and it really hit him. But we got in a lot of trouble, because he called in some favors. New York City police showed up, and the police in Long Island got upset, and they leaked it to the New York Post and the New York Times, and it became a big headline story about what they were doing in the Hamptons, and so they all headed back. And but I mean, we got some help. President George H.W. Bush sent alcohol, tobacco, and firearms to check, because I mean, it was a big deal in the sense that he was the only black guy, I think, at the time living in a town called Amagansett, Long Island, which is one of the Tony places up there. It was just a very different time, and he always suspected might be racially motivated, but we never found anything to justify that.
I mentioned before about my grandfather, Frank Lemby, who's a character. And my Frank Lemby moment from reading that story was how you're in Long Island, and he wanted to call the New York mayor, and you're like, Reg, they don't have any jurisdiction over there. And he's like, who cares? Just do it.
It was just a favor. Yeah. And they came up there, the New York City detectives, but the Long Island guys, I just didn't realize they really hated it, and they leaked it to the press, and it was a big brouhaha. And then the New York Post ran it, and the New York Times had a big story on it. You can Google it, and it became an issue. I mean, but he was nice enough. He sent turkeys. It was almost Thanksgiving, to all the firemen that had helped out with the fire. But to the end of his life, he always suspected.
What do you think? Do you think it was arson, or do you think that?
Well,
it
I
was
wound
just
up
bad luck?
digging on my hands and knees through the ashes there, Damon, straight off the plane from Paris. And
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what we were going to find, but we never found anything. It's probably faulty wiring. Since then, I've learned of a lot of fires at these big homes and all these fancy places, and it's inevitably a cause of faulty wiring when you've got an old home.
Reg passes away, and did you think at that time that your time working with the company was going to be done?
Yeah, I was concerned, because my whole life was focused on him. I was his guy, but I didn't have time. I'm saying 4 days later, Damon, my own father passed away, and I always regretted not. I was supposed to call him from Baltimore, where the first funeral service was being held. I wanted to chat with him and talk to him. He was big, my advisor and my friend, really, and and I was one of the pallbearers at Reg's funeral in Baltimore, and a motorcycle cop approached us, and then he talked to somebody, and the head pilot of our jet came up to me and said, I've got some bad news. And your father just died in Manila, and I always regretted not making that last phone call to him.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. But, I figured somebody up there was trying to tell me something, because to take my boss away, my anchor at work, and then to take my father away at the same time, that was sort of a lot for me. And I wound up flying home, and I'd set up the wake. There's a huge wake for him in New York City with everybody there, and people giving these long speeches. But I missed all that. I'd set it up for them, but I wound up, I told Loyda Lewis, his widow, I was going to go home. I was finally going to go home and spend some time with my family back there and my mother to help them.
But you had a good relationship with your father, right?
I did, and then I think that has a lot to do with sort of the person I am. I think I would like to think I'm a good father because of that. But we'd listen to baseball in the middle of the night, World Series games on shortwave radio from Manila. And it was the St. Louis Cardinals. They won a couple of World Series back then. And even though my dad was a Yankees fan, but it was fun. And I developed a love for the game that's never left me. And I took my son when he was 3 years old, Yankees game. And one of the best points in my life was taking my father to his first baseball game at Yankee Stadium, courtesy of the Daily News.
Yeah, I feel like you is that I feel like I'm good father because my dad was a good father, and my mom is a wonderful mother. And so for whatever it's worth, don't beat yourself up over that call you didn't make because your dad knows that you loved him. And, I mean, of course you want to do it differently, but that's how life goes sometimes.
Well, I learned later that he was proud of me. It came to me in the middle of the night one time, that the feeling of pride, because I was regretting it. And my wife later said that he adored me. He always told me I was living the life he dreamed of in New York, doing public relations and all that, and traveling everywhere. I was taking the Concorde a lot. I was taking private jets. Just unimaginable for a kid from Manila.
So you got let go, right? I mean, they called you in and said, "Hey, we're
I got fired.
consolidating."
I got fired. But a year after the change in CEOs, I mean, that's what happens, Damon. I mean, they happened to best with when I was working with the Jamaican Prime Minister earlier in my life. But and he lost the election. But this time I got fired, and but I had a wife to worry about, and that made a big difference to me. So I was concerned. But a year after that, to my huge surprise and to the surprise of the world, somebody who we'd always thought was a corporate wife, her name was Loyda Lewis, and she wound up coming back with a force, and she took over as CEO from Reg's brother, and she brought me back, and that was a big change for me. It was like good times were back. But she was also a very different type of leader from her husband. She really believed in deeply in her faith. I think that made a big difference to her, and maybe it was her being a woman, maybe it's the fact that she had gotten stepped on a lot when Reg was around, but she was more of a nurturer. And I always left her office feeling much better about things and about life than when I went in. And she had that kind of aura, and she really spread a lot of love. And she'd start her meetings with a prayer, which the executives at TLC Beatrice International were not used to. They used to roll their eyes and say, "Oh boy." But and then she would I'd write some of the speeches for Reg and her, and she always wanted some quote from the Bible, from Isaiah or something. And that was a big change for her husband. So he was not spreading love around the office, but she was. I mean, you really felt a certain aura from her to this day, that you feel lighter in your heart, and which is great. And I finally got to have a kid after she took over. I got to start a family and spend more time with my wife.
But she was still tough, right, as a leader. I mean, you told a story about, I don't remember exactly, but Jean said, "Can't we put this warehouse under this business?" And she's like, "No, it's going to stay here."
Yeah, she was tough. She was tough with the French, because we had all the Europeans were sort of difficult to deal with. Well, not a lot of them, and they're all our partners in different companies there. But there's a French family called the Beaux, and they own these 7-Eleven type stores. We own them. Beatrice International owned them, but they acted like they owned them. They'd started them, and then Beatrice bought them from them, and we were the majority shareholders. But we built this warehouse, and they're insisting that the warehouse should be theirs. I mean, their end of the business. They ran these. They call them From Prix and Leader Price. To this day, you can go to Paris and you'll see them on every corner. But and Loyda said, forget it. We spent some money. We built this, and but let's move on to the next subject. But she was tough. I mean, she let go of 50% of the corporate staff in New York. At the time of her husband, we had a corporate jet. She sold that. And then we also used to have these great palatial offices overlooking Central Park in New York, which I loved. And she wound up putting me in a cubicle with down the street. And it was a big change in my life.
Yeah.
I no longer had a big office. But that came with the territory. I mean, she cut costs, she increased revenues, and as my old former boss said, she brought the ship home, and she raised the value for shareholders, and it was totally unexpected because she was always a corporate wife to the executives. You hardly ever heard from her, except at the funeral. She wanted to call the shots in terms of the wake, but. Yeah, she really took over, and she led us and steered the ship home.
What would Reg, if he was alive right now, think of your book?
Probably he'd be calling this podcast up and complain,
Yeah, I get a call
start
on the
yelling
phone
at
like, who
you.
the heck are you?
You've been having that guy on, but no, he was such a micromanager sometimes. But I like to think that whatever I say in the book, I'm helping revive his memory. I'm helping reintroduce him into the national conversation after 30, 40 years. Had I written this book soon after he passed away, it would have been much easier. I mean, he was still big name news back then. But I waited all this time to learn all these lessons and look back. And I feel like I'm reintroducing him to a whole new generation of people. There's people around who are older who remember the Beatrice days and the takeover days. They're fewer now. But the idea that Reginald Lewis stood for, the type of personality he was, and the lessons that I learned from it, and what people did back then in the 1980s and 1990s in terms of big corporate takeovers and taken conquered back and forth from Paris. That type of lifestyle, I think, has a resonance to today, to younger people who have no idea what happened before the 2020s or something, and there were no social media, and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times called the shots back then.
Well, as we wrap up here, and I've absolutely loved every moment of this, let's just talk for a minute about what you're doing now.
Well, that's a big change, Damon, is that I wound up moving from leveraged buyouts and corporate takeovers to becoming a humanitarian in a sense. These days I give a lot of talks, and I do a lot of work in terms of disasters, whether they're natural hazards, natural disasters, or there's even some man-made disasters in conflict situations. So I do spend a lot of time on that. I just came back from Geneva, where I spoke at the UN conference over there, and I do this all the time. And I can talk to you for hours on end about different typhoons or ISIS-inspired conflicts in southern Philippines, which we're involved
Wow.
in. And the other part of my life, I deal with startups. I help mentor them with a team I have, and we invest in them, take equity in them. So it's very different, though. Sometimes they wind up being disasters too. But so that's a big change for me, because it's very fulfilling, and it's a whole different side of me that's gotten opened up and really brought me closer to what life's all about.
What's one more thing you want to leave our audience with before we close out?
That idea that if you read about people and see them on social media, don't believe it. I mean, you're much happier than many of these people are, and that there's a lot of value in being a good father, being a good husband, being a good spouse, and and you get a lot of joy there, more joy than some of these guys that you read about in the press or watch on TV. And because I found just mixing with some of these people, they're just not very happy people. And so I just living an ordinary life and watching the ball game is just a great life. And I think that people should be real happy about that. At the end of your life, I think it's something that you'll realize, that your happiness comes from who you're with, from your family, not from making a lot of money or being famous.
Butch, this has been amazing. Your book just came out. It came out May 5th, May 6th, I believe. So listeners, go out and get it. It's a great book, From Manila to Wall Street. Butch, where else can our listeners connect with you at?
Well, I've got my website, butchmeily.com, and then there's the books on Amazon and Barnes & Noble on their websites. And you can just Google me, and you can Google me at the organizations I lead to. You get in touch with me there. And but my email address is on my website, and I'm therefore subject to a lot of weird emails. But all kinds of strange people, but it's there, and so feel free to email me and tell me what you really think about the book.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Butch. This has been such a pleasure. I'm glad I had the opportunity to read the book. And so listeners, until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and have a great day, everybody.
We're hitting a stage where we want to say, okay, all those boxes I checked, do they matter? Do I have a footprint in the world? Do I matter? And it's really a point where some